helping promote Clarence's bands, like the SOS band, you know, Alexander O'Neill, and then Clarence gets appointed as chairman of Motown. And you have to remember that every Black hair care company, every Black fashion designer, every Black photographer, every Black record company, or people that had anything to do with record companies, even the majors were coming to me saying, what are you going to play? Because whatever you put out on that TV sells records, you know, because of Our Price, Tower, Sam Goody, HMV, and even the newcomer on the block at the time was Virgin Megastore. Because I dealt with Virgin, because you know that they had the record label, and they were just getting into the airline business, and I happened to be on one of the early flights with Richard Branson, and he started telling me about this thing called the Megastore. Now you got to remember that he took that word, the mega, from the hip hop fraternity, just like we took Def 2 to create that segment of BBC 2. And so, you know, what I want to say to people listening and everybody thinking, yeah, but how do you crack America? How do you know? I didn't go to America wanting to crack America. Right. I went to America to say, I'm going to tell your story because you are my brothers and sisters, and you can't do it. That system, you got to remember, was so oppressive that they couldn't crack mainstream. Okay, so don't forget the Billboard had the Black music charts, which came from the race charts. And Music Week and the Brits didn't even see us. We were invisible.
Mate, sometimes I think we're still invisible now in most parts, mate. But you see, like you were saying about cracking America, well, that whole cracking America and being with the BBC at a young age. Now, I know for a fact, all right, you was born in 62. At 14 years old, you went to New York, all right? And at 14, that's 1976. What brought you there? Why in that period of time where we know, for those who know the culture, no, New York in 76 was not a nice place to be at. What brought you to New York at such a young age?
Do you know what? Because one, I loved American TV shows, right? So I would watch them. In those days, I had to drop money in the back of the telly. Threepence, my uncle had a telly, and we wanted to watch the shows, and I would look at, you know, the shows in the TV guides and mark them out. And so it was appointment to view television because we had to. On the radio, there was no pop radio, right? There was only Radio Luxembourg and Radio Caroline. They were pirate stations.
Yeah.
And Radio Caroline was out on the high seas, and sometimes it was a bit crackly. And Radio Luxembourg was on medium wave because it was coming from continental Europe. And so the only way you could hear Black music, whether it's soul, ska, reggae, calypso, was through house parties, going down to the record shop. You know, you had to really seek out the music. And when Sam Cooke died, he got shot. Sam Cooke was a famous singer who sang "You Send Me," "Cupid," "Twisting the Night Away," "Chain Gang," and "Change Is Gonna Come," which is made very famous by President Obama's inaugural campaign. So I became a big fan of Sam Cooke, collecting the record. And I said, you know, I'm going to make the movie about Sam Cooke. So to make the movie about Sam Cooke, I was buying and selling my comic books to buy a film camera. And then the film in those days worked out to about the equivalent today of about £200 for 3 minutes.
Jeez.
So to fund that, I said, where can I go to get more of these comics? Because in those days, most comics in the UK were black and white. They weren't in color.
Dress.
And the color comics, the real American comics, they were hard to find because they were never really imported. They came as ballast on the ships. You know, the ships would take product to America, but they didn't want to come back empty. So when they were coming back, they'd come back with all sorts of things. So the American comics would come back either water damaged or no consistency. Like you might buy issue 1 and then you wouldn't see it again until issue 20.
Wow. Okay.
So I was working at this publisher who we did the very first comic book price guide, which Sotheby's and Christie's and all of those use in the UK, which was based on the American comic book price guide by Overstreet. But when I got to America and I went down to the Schomburg Library and was walking around the streets, I recognized the streets from my TV shows and the comics. So Marvel Comics, their heroes actually existed in real places that I could identify from the comics. So I ended up wandering off down to the South Bronx, down to Harlem, you know, Manhattan, you name it. And then I came across the record stores that also had the music that was not available in the UK. So I'd come back with the comics and the music, which I could then sell as import records.
Right.
And that's how I built up my business to buy my film camera to make the Sam Cooke story. And then after that, and I put it on, in those days, you could hire a cinema on a Sunday afternoon because everybody was at church and the cinemas didn't make any money, you know, in the afternoon, like about 2 o'clock because everybody was at church. And so it was an ABC Coronet in East London, and I put it on there, and I put it on another place called Chat's Palace. And I guess the rest is history, because somebody from the BBC came and somebody from what was to become Channel 4. Remember, this is before we had Channel 4. We only had ITV, BBC One and BBC Two at the time. So there's only 3 channels. They promised that they would come back for me when I was of age, because I was too young. When I made that movie, I was too young. And so they did, and that's how I ended up in the BBC.
So with regards to that, you obviously, for your selling and buying of records and comic stuff, you built a large archive, all right? Which I found out that you also lost. Like you had 4 units of paintings, comics, memorabilia, all burned to the ground. Now, how did that pressure of losing all the stuff you built up over the years?
Oh, that was over 40 years of archive and collection. So everything from, you know, film recordings with Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross and all the hip hop stuff, and my own private stuff, you know, from when I was a child to my comic book collections. And I don't know if people listening know, but it's funny because, you know, you store these things in these warehouses. And funnily enough, mine was called Safe House. You know, I was recovering from my illness, and we can talk about that later. And I got a call saying that, you know, the warehouse was on fire. My wife called me and said, the warehouse is on fire. And I could just hear this panic on the phone. I was in Jamaica at the time. And then she sent me a link that I could go on, and it was ITV with their helicopter in the air. And it was one of the biggest fires in London. And this was just after they'd finished the Tottenham, or they were building the Tottenham stadium, football stadium. So the prices in and around the area were just shooting up because it's being gentrified. And I guess the warehouse, you know, who, for whatever reason, who knows, it was after hours, and it was a blaze like you would not believe. And funnily enough, even with one of the companies that I'm dealing with, that is doing a lot of business with me and is one of my sponsors, Luster, they were also based in the same site, as well as other record companies, as well as people who had businesses like car sales and import-export businesses. So there's a whole load of people that you wouldn't believe were just campaigning, trying to get on site. The whole lot burnt down. And I had 4 units the size of, well, if you imagine a garage that could store maybe 20 Rolls Royces. Yeah.
Okay.
But
that must have been tremendous. I can imagine what the impact on that was.
Well, yeah, I was broke afterwards, because the funniest thing is, you then have to prove what's in there when everything is raised to literally cinders on the ground. And then you find yourself contesting your own insurers, the insurers of the building, and it went on and was costing me a lot of money to just fight the people that I took the insurance for the units out with, that was part of Safe House, and my own business insurance, who was asking me to prove what was in there. And even when I sent them pictures and lists and inventories, they said, well, that still doesn't prove it. Can you provide receipts?
Right.
Well, how can you provide receipts for over 40 years and your childhood stuff and a tape and a record and a this and a that and the comic books? Well, you don't go to comic book conventions and get receipts for that. So yeah, so it was 10 million pounds up in smoke, and a week later I was broke.
Wow. But you were broke from then, but to get you you were broke in the end, but before you were broke, you tackled a US, in particular with hip hop, you tackled a US market that was, robust, So with the likes of, we spoke about Public Enemy, you breaking their careers, and Will Smith, Queen Latifah, Shante, how did these guys, what was your influence on them to make them break into the market as well? And who did you like the most working with when it comes to, in the hip hop world, when it comes to bringing up and working and developing?
Look, a lot of them are probably not even aware, right? Because that's kind of the way the business works. And I'm the background guy, right? I'm the guy that makes the magic happen. And I also make the business of it happen. So, whether you're thinking about Queen Latifah, Roxanne Shante, or even the real Roxanne, or Big Daddy Kane, or KRS-One, or Schoolie D, or Just Ice, or Mantronics, Force MD, Full Force, MC Light. All of these people appeared on my shows and got the international exposure. And also I filmed interviews with them, because it's not just one thing. You don't just break a record by just playing it. You've got to tell a story. So what I brought to the business was telling the story around the music. And guess what? This was the other thing I used to do on my show, Behind the Beat, the music show, was I had a section called Respect Due. And the Americans used to love it, because they didn't even know the roots of the music.
So
and you've got to remember, there's a reason for that. Because in the days when Dick Clark was making American Bandstand, some of them never even saw it because Dick Clark's show would only go to certain affiliates, white affiliates, right? And remember, this was a time when you couldn't even dance with a white person. And, you know, Sam Cooke, all the Motown acts used to perform, Jackie Wilson, Aretha Franklin, with whites sitting on this side and black people sitting on that side. And along comes me with MTV saying we won't play black music. And I'm having these big hits telling black stories. And at the time when you're getting 12 million in the UK, at that time, I don't even think we were like 1 million black people. We'd have probably been just about 1 million black people.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
You know, even when I went to the States, this was when Michael Jackson's Thriller had just become big. And, you know, I was working on a story with trying to get Michael Jackson, and everybody wanted Michael Jackson. And I happened to get through to a company that represented Pepsi. And then I flew to Connecticut to meet the boss of Pepsi. And I remember when I came out the airport, and in the, you know, like I would always get a limo sent for me wherever I was. But the funniest thing was when they held up the card saying, Mr. Jervis, and I walk up, nobody's taking my bags. They want me to keep walking, you know, just, and I'm like, no, I'm Mr. Jervis. No. Do you work for Mr. Jervis? No, I am Mr. Jervis. Right? And, you know, there's a brilliant book by one of the Pepsi former CEO called The Other Guy Blinked, which is about how Pepsi won the Coca-Cola wars. They won it with Michael Jackson because Michael did that famous video where his hair caught fire, called, you know, You're the Pepsi Generation, you know the song. And so that was how I got to work with Michael Jackson, and then went to do the shows. And funny enough, when I first met him, I was in a hotel, you know, on a one-to-one to actually have a conversation. I was in the Mayfair Hotel. And I was talking to his manager at the time, who was telling me how much money, and, you know, the usual thing you go through with the managers. And, you know, and Michael heard the songs that I was playing on a VHS tape to Frank DeLeo, showing him, you know, the aspects of my shows and how I go back into the history and all of that. And two of the people, Jackie Wilson, James Brown, and Sam Cooke, were Michael's big influences. And suddenly he comes bounding in to watch the video, to see them performing.
Good.
And then, of course, Clarence Avant again pops up in my life. This is before, you know, the Motown years, because Clarence was also managing the Jackson tour, and you remember when the Jacksons all got back together, and you know, Michael was doing Bad and the History tour. So Clarence and I mean, we talk every week still. I mean, imagine, Clarence and I have spoken every week for like 30 years.
Is it the same sort of thing, the relationship you have with Quincy Jones as well? Is it something similar you have with Quincy?
Yeah, well,
obviously, I've seen the picture with you, Oprah, Quincy.
Yeah, Quincy, yeah, I can call up Quincy, but that's, you know, but only when I've got something to talk to Quincy about. With Clarence, we always have something to talk about. But Quincy only lives like down the road from Clarence. So, you know, whenever I'm over there, you know, it's a short run. And, you know, Clarence is usually over at his house. Quincy and Clarence have known each other for God knows how long. You know, you got to remember, Clarence is nearly 90. You know, and Quincy's roughly about the same age. So I did the history of soul music with Quincy, and I also did hip hop history with Quincy, because of course Quincy comes from the bebop tradition, right?
Mhm.
And so Quincy actually was probably the first person to broker a kind of hip hop truce between the East Coast, West Coast.
Yep.
This was after
Yep.
Tupac and Biggie, right?
Yep.
And Quincy was saying to me, this violence has got to end. And I think I think I still got the cassette tape of the recording upstairs. Because, you know, when we used to record in those days, we not only made the video recording, we made the 1/4-inch recording, and then we also made a cassette recording, because in those days, it wasn't like Siri, you know, we had to then give the cassette to the woman who would do all the transcripts for us, so that when we were editing, we could pick out the pieces of sync against the time code and you know, do what we called a paper edit.
Mm-hmm. But what two things I know, see what we got here, I could go on for ages talking to you about so much stuff, because there's stuff we have connections with ourselves, with the whole carnival under the cage and all this sort of stuff. But there's two questions I want to ask you before I close up. I only got 5 minutes or 4 minutes left. The first one is, obviously with all these 40 years of accumulating, gathering, losing, winning, losing again, and then you had like cancer, you know, having the cancer, and obviously you had COVID recently as well. Did that impact you in any form of way? Or how did it impact you?
Yeah, well, I had stage 4 terminal cancer.
I lost a friend through cancer recently. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, look, Clarence, by the way, has just been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right? And why I'm happy about that is because through cancer, I never feared death. I wanted to make sure that, most importantly, my time on earth was well spent and there was a legacy. And remember I said to you, I had that section called Respect You. You know, I helped Clarence with his Taboo Records and his artists, and then at Motown, you know. And then when I had cancer, it was quite aggressive. It was head, neck, and throat. So the chances of me surviving was next to zero. And, you know, I had a near-death experience, and I had 33 days of radiation, chemo, lost the skin on my face, lost my hair. I was literally passing away, and Clarence, you know, flew in. He got on a plane with his wife and flew in because he could not bear to lose me without seeing me. For the contributions, he said, not that I just made to America, but to the Black diaspora. And you got to remember, Clarence is very conscious of the Black diaspora because he's been just about everywhere. And if no one's seen The Black Godfather, they need to watch it on Netflix. Then you'll kind of understand that I am walking into tradition. Remember this, I'm in living memory meaning that I met these people of the last 100 years of Black music. That's why I did Back to Black, the original Back to Black, not the Amy Winehouse one, the one that she took the name from, which was 100 years of Black music. So when I do it, I don't see it as hip hop, as jazz, as Afro beats, as merengue, as salsa, as trap, as drill, as grime. I look at the history of what connects us. I don't look at what divides us. And that's what I want to say to the young people. The reason you can't break it is because you haven't looked at yourself and looked at what binds us.
Right.
So if you're killing each other, you're not progressing. It doesn't end well.
2 words. And we have a minute left on the Q&A between me and you, all right? And then we're going to open the floor up to other questions from the audience. My final question, it'll make you smile. I asked you this a couple of days ago. As a comic book fan, Marvel or DC? Come on now.
Pow, you don't know about me. You know what? Marvel, I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you. Look, I bought a little treat for you. I bought a little treat. Marvel, right? That's the history of the Black Panther Encyclopedia. I got that, right? Marvel, I still got the originals of these, right? Can you see that?
I can see it's slightly blurred, but I can see what it is. I know that's Thor.
Yeah, it's Thor. It's these are the original comic books. And I've even got the Superman versus Muhammad Ali. I do. Oh yeah, I do like you know, I do like DC. Of course.
I love DC for the actual artwork. Like you can't beat Detective Comics with the artwork.
I don't know if anybody can see that. It's still in this bag, but that's the original Superman versus Muhammad Ali. And the reason why this has a lot to do with hip hop, I mean, you will know this, Gus, but a lot of people watching this won't know. But actually, graffiti was inspired by the comic books, because most of the rappers.
Before you go further, Terry, sorry, there's one guy on here who will probably talk about this in a bit in the question and answer. His name's Bunny, and I spoke to you about it before.
Oh yeah.
He's one of the most prolific graffiti artists in the UK, probably Europe. So and I learned my graffiti stuff through him, and you'll probably say something a little later on. But yeah, continue.
Oh, okay, well, good, because look, when I got there, and I was there at the birth of hip hop, right? But I was the comic book guy. And look, there's a series on Netflix, right, which is about the kind of birth of hip hop, and you know, just like we were on both sides of the Atlantic, inspired by like kung fu and martial arts movies and comic books. You know, so if you look at the early rappers, they were dressed like comic book artists in bright colors. You know, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. You know, Houdini. You know, that looked like they walked out of the Rawhide series. You know, the original black hip hop cowboys. You had, you know, Kool Moe Dee. Remember the famous battle between Kool Moe Dee and LL Cool J?
To the break of dawn.
Yeah, so you know, and I don't want to be remiss about the women like MC Lyte, Queen Latifah, first, you know, kind of rap feminist in a way. With Ladies First. But again, when we were recording with Queen Latifah, she had to literally spell out her name and hyphenate so people knew how to actually pronounce it. You know.
You also got the people like Shah Rukh and Lisa Lee and all the other earlier Sequence and them guys as well, who were like, you know.
I mean, there are so many to mention. But as I say, because and you know what, this is the first of I've ever really talked about this. So you got this exclusively, because I've never really talked about you know, the hip hop years, and even with young people now not realizing that Afrobeat was born out of Fela Kuti, who was influenced by Bob Marley and James Brown. So if you think Bob Marley and James Brown were the catalysts to the creation of Afrobeat, right? That fella then took back to Nigeria, right? And you had the fusion of rap and everything, and the modern take. You know, don't forget, I mean, people forget about even the artist Dr. Alban. It's My Life.
I remember that.
Yeah, Kevin Lyle from Def Jam, you know, even one of the co-writers of Milli Vanilli, you know, in the background, he went, you know, to be a big player in Def Jam.